Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Storytelling Association of California's production of the genre storytelling series. We are almost at the end of our second year. In July, we will have humorous stories, and then we will start our third year again with personal stories, then folk tales, going to spooky, scary stories, sacred stories, many more throughout the year. And we are excited that all of you are here. Our MC tonight is Rupa Mohan, and she is one of the Storytelling Association of California board members, and she also runs an amazing program in the schools from the Jenny Fund. So please welcome Rupa Mohan.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so happy to see you all. And tonight we shall immerse in the magical world of fairies, goblins, nymphs, maybe some good and evil beings, and perhaps some unknown spirits. We have 7 talented storytellers waiting to entrance us and transport us to our childhood. So sit back and get ready to enter a mystical fantasy land of pure imagination. Our first teller is Charles Kiernan, and he is today our out-of-state guest from Pennsylvania. After retiring from gainful employment, Charles has been performing at theaters, schools, libraries, and art festivals. He is also president of the Lehigh Valley Storytelling Guild. He takes great pleasure in telling traditional fairy tales to audiences of all ages. He focuses on the German, English, and Irish stories collected during the 19th century, such as The White Snake and The Horned Women. I'm curious about that one. In addition, Charles is a fantasy writer, author of A Vacant Throne, and known for his blog, Fairy Tale of the Month. Welcome, Charles, and we can't wait to hear your story.
Thank you. I do like to tell the Grimm stories in particular. The Grimms didn't write those stories, they collected them. And they collected over 200 folk tales and fairy tales. The one I'm going to be telling tonight is probably one of the better known of these tales. It's The Fisherman and the Flounder. Wealth that is old is made out of gold. That which you treasure you'll have in good measure. But a boon from the sea you had better let be. There was an old fisherman and his wife, Isabel, who lived in a run-down, miserable hovel by the sea. The sort of place that when it rained, the water came in to visit, sat around on the chairs. Well, every day the fishermen went fishing. And if he caught something, that was their supper. If not, well, there was always cabbages. But one day he was fishing and he caught a flounder, the largest he had ever seen. But the flounder spoke to him and said, "Fisherman, do not kill me. I am not what I seem. I am an enchanted prince. The sea is now my kingdom. What would it profit you to kill me? I shan't be good to eat. Please, return me to my kingdom. Return me to the sea." "No," said the fisherman, "you need not make so many words of it. I could not eat a talking fish." And with that, he let him go. Well, that evening when he came home, Isabel asked him, "Did you catch anything?" "No, I did. I caught a flounder, but he said he was an enchanted prince, so I let him go." "An enchanted prince? What did you wish for?" "What did I what?" "Oh, you old fool, he was an enchanted prince. He could have given you any wish you wanted." "Oh, what would I wish for?" "What would you wish for? We live in this miserable hovel. Go back to the flounder. Tell him I want a cottage." I can't do that." "Well, if you want any supper at all." Back to the sea went the fisherman. And he stood upon a rock that jutted out into the ocean, and he saw the sun setting and creating a diamond ripple on the waves. And he called out, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, prithee hearken unto me. My wife Isabel will have her will, and sends me to beg a boon of thee." The water roiled and boiled, and up came the flounder. "Ah, my good fisherman, what does Isabel wish for?" "Well, sir, we live in a humble home." "Oh, it's a nice little hovel, really. But she would like a cottage." "It is as Isabel wishes." When the fisherman went home, there was the cottage, the garden in the backyard, ducks and chicken in the front yard, and a white picket fence all around it. "Well, isn't this pleasant?" "Yes, but it's a little small. Go back to the flounder. Tell him I want a castle." There was no arguing with Isabel. Back to the sea went the fisherman. He stood upon his rock. And now the sun had set, the moon was rising. There was a cloud in front of the moon. He called out, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, prithee hearken unto me. My wife Isabel will have her will, and sends me to beg a boon of thee." Up came the flounder. "Ah, my good fisherman, what does Isabel want now?" "Oh, sir, she says the codgers she would like a castle." "A castle it is." Now when he came home, there was the castle. Great oaken door with long metal hinges and a servant to open it. "Wow, isn't this grand?" "Yes, but it's too bad we can't live here." "Why can't we live here? The flounder gave it to us." "You old fool. Fishermen and their wives don't live in castles. Kings and queens live in castles. Now go back to the flounder. Tell him you want to be king." I don't want to be king. I won't be king." "Very well. Have it your way. I'll be king." Back to the sea went the fisherman, and he stood upon his rock. The sea was gray and restless. There was a chill in the air. But the fisherman called out, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, prithee hearken unto me. My wife Isabel will have her will, and sends me to beg a boon of thee." "What does she want now?" "Oh, sir, she says fishermen and their wives don't live in..." "Well, I know you can't do this, but she wants to be king." "King she is." Now when he came back, there was a moat all around the castle, a drawbridge, and guards at the door. And in the main hall, sitting on a throne with a crown on her head, was Isabel. "Are you happy now?" "No." "Why should I just be king? I could be emperor." "Go back to the flounder. Tell him I want to be emperor. I, your king, command it." Back to the sea went the fisherman, stood upon his rock. But now the sea was dark and stormy. Clouds covered the moon. A cold wind blew. Yet he called out, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, prithee hearken unto me. My wife Isabel will have her will, and sends me to beg a boon of thee." "What does she want now?" "Oh, sir, she's not content being king. Now she wants to be emperor." "Emperor she is." When he returned, there was no castle. It was a palace, flags flying from the parapets. An army marched in front, trumpets blew. And in the main hall, there were lords and ladies in waiting. And at the end of the hall, a staircase half a mile high. And there on the throne sat Isabel with a crown that was much too big for her. "Are you emperor?" "Yes, I am emperor." "But what good is it? I cannot make the sun rise. I cannot make the moon set. I cannot make the stars come out." "Go back to the flounder. Tell him I want to be queen of the universe." "I can't. You can't. He can't. Guards, guards, take him away." Well, he was picked up, carried down to the sea, and set upon his rock. Ah, but the sea was black. The wind howled, waves ate at the shoreline. And still he called out, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, prithee hearken unto me. My wife Isabel will have her will, and sends me to beg a boon of thee." "You must be kidding." "Oh, sir, I can hardly bring myself to say it, but she wants to be queen of the universe." Return. Your wife Isabel waits for you at the door of your miserable hovel. Wealth that is old is made out of gold. That which you treasure, you'll have in good measure. But a boon from the sea you had better let be. Fisherman and the Flounder. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. That was so delightful, infused with poetry and wisdom. And you had mentioned it was your favorite childhood fairy tale, and you heard it from your sister. So it's very special indeed. And thank you for sharing that. And now I would like to go on to our next storyteller. Her name is Aunt Leanne, and she delights children and adults. She is from the Storytellers of San Diego. She is a professional storyteller, an actor, coach, and teaching artist, performing for more than 30 years. Her stories often have music and song wound throughout them. And she is also the state liaison of NSN, a clinical herbalist, and she teaches annual Scotch classes. Yes, the libation, not the language. And she is also the winner of the 2020 NSN first ever virtual story slam. That's very, very commendable. Her favorite story or fairy tale growing up was Beauty and the Beast, a great sacrifice made by a brave heroine leading to love conquering all. Now, please enchant us with your story tonight.
Thank you, Rupa. Oh my goodness, that was lovely, Charles. Thank you. My story begins with a king and a queen who long for a child. How often do these fairy tales begin with a couple that longs for a child? And they did everything they could that they could think of to have a princess or a prince. And at last, the fairies whispered, "You will have a baby, but you must not forget us." And in time, a little baby girl was born. And I don't know if it was because the fairies whispered or in the hustle and bustle of a royal family gathering people together for a naming day, but the fairies were forgotten. And on the princess's naming day, the fairy appeared uninvited. She was strange to all who saw her, dressed all in black, gaunt and old, and teetered up to the cradle to give a most strange gift. To this land this child is tied, but who wants a bairn that never cried? And poof, she was gone. The people were startled. They wondered what had happened. They talked for a little bit, and then they forgot. This princess was so loved, and she was so good. That was what everybody kept saying. Oh, this baby is so good. She's not keeping the castle awake, wailing through the night like we had expected. What a good baby. But by the time she was 3, people had noticed that this princess never cried. And by the time she was 5, they noticed that not one drop of rain had fallen since the princess's naming day. And now people did remember the fairy's strange gift. To this land, this child is tied, but who wants a bairn that never cried. And the king and the queen went to work. They tried to get the little one to cry for 5 years. They tried everything they could, but she didn't. And her mother grew worried about the princess herself. When other children were around listening to sad stories, they would all tear up, but not the princess. She lost interest and got distracted and started doing other things. So the king and the queen put out a proclamation. Anyone who can make the princess cry, and the queen added, without physically harming her, will receive 3 bags of gold. Well, that brought them in. People came every day, and the wisest ones in the kingdom came up and said, "We have an idea. If you feed the princess nothing but bread and a tasteless soup, she will surely grow sad and cry." But the princess ate what was given to her and lost interest and got distracted and did other things and didn't seem to mind. Then came a magician from a far off kingdom. He said, "I know what to do to make your daughter cry." So the king and the queen brought him into her room and said, "Do not harm her." He said, "I'm going to break her toys." And he threw her favorite doll in the air and the leg broke. And the princess laughed. "Oh, that looks like fun," she said. She began to throw her trucks and dolls and toys in the air to watch them shatter. And the wise magician left in a hurry. After that, every day, the king and the queen sent out messengers on white horses to proclaim as loud as they could, "Anyone who can make the princess cry will receive 3 bags of gold. 3 bags of gold to anyone who can make the princess cry." And on the other side of town, there was a little girl who had been born on the princess's naming day. Her name was Margaret. And she had seen more than her share of sorrow and shed more than her share of tears. Her father had died in war before she was born, and her mother had died in childbirth. She was raised by her grandparents, but this last 10-year drought had meant her grandfather had had to work harder and harder until they lost him, dead in the field. And now her grandmother was sick. Little Margaret tried to take care of her, to nurse her as best she could. She went to the doctor and said, "Please, isn't there anything you could do for my grandma?" And the doctor said, "Well, there is medicine that would probably help her, but it's very expensive. I will see what I can do." And Margaret may have been little, but she knew that often "I'll see what I can do" meant that nothing would be done. So she went home and she made her grandmother the very best chicken soup that she could. And while she was preparing that soup, she saw a white horse ride by right outside of her window. "3 bags of gold to anyone who can make the princess cry." 3 bags of gold. 1 bag of gold would be enough for my family for a year, and the medicine besides. And then Margaret had an idea. "I know how to make the princess cry." She went in to her grandmother and said, "Grandmother, I will be back soon, and all our troubles will be over." And then she packed up her things in a bag and she set off to the castle. And everywhere she went, people said, "Margaret, where are you going?" And she said, "I am going to make the princess cry." And as soon as she would walk by, people would say, "Who does she think she is? Smarter than the wisest of advisors? Who does she think she is? She's just a little girl." And even when she got to the door, to the gates of the castle that were guarded by those soldiers, they said, "No, we are not going to let you in. You're just a little girl. We will not let the king and queen be so disappointed." But the queen happened to be walking by at that very moment. And she saw the little girl on the step and she invited her in. And when she heard that Margaret really thought she could make the princess cry, she brought her up to her room. 5 minutes alone with the princess. And so she had Margaret go into the door and closed it and ran to find the king and came back, and both of them pressed their ears to the door to hear what was going on inside. And they heard the strangest noise, thunk, 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 and then sobbing. They quickly pushed open the door and looked inside, and there was the princess and Margaret, both with tears streaming down their faces, holding large, sharp knives and chopping onions. The king and the queen came in and laughed and joined the princess and Margaret laughing and crying. And then they heard it, the sound of rain on the castle roof, and the sound of cheering from the wet streets below as the people gathered. And that is the story of the princess who never cried. And I warn you all, pay attention to the fairies.
Thank you, Aunt Leanne. That was so delightful, and I loved your singing as well. And I'm going to go start chopping a lot of onions. We could use the rain here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And now let's go on to our next storyteller, Adrienne Lowry, coming from the Inland Valley Storytellers. And she is a writer, editor, singer, and a college professor. But guess what? She's been telling stories ever since she wrote her first story for her Girl Scout troop newsletter in 5th grade. She has continued to do so with every classroom of students she gets. She has always liked Goldilocks and the 3 Bears because there's a girl who really knows what she wants. Adrienne loves telling alternate versions of familiar stories, little-known tales from well-known storytellers, and mysterious accounts from Celtic heritage. Today, she has chosen a story which will weave together some of these elements and more. Methinks she will weave some magic for us. So here is Adrian.
There we go. Hello. Well, I think we are on a princess theme because I want to tell you about a woman who lived with a son and a daughter many years ago. And one day when the mother was feeling very ill and at death's door, she called her daughter to her and said, "There, I give you this scarf and a comb, and never use another scarf but this one to wipe yourself with, and never use another comb to smooth your hair." And after saying this, she breathed her last. After her mother's death, the girl always obeyed her mother's commands. Whenever she used the comb, many seed pearls and large-sized ones would fall from her head. And when she wiped herself with the scarf, the same thing happened always. More pearls would fall. The maiden related this to her brother, and he advised her to keep all the pearls that fell and string them up in bunches. The maiden then formed 6 long, glowing strands with the pearls she had, and the brother, who was a sailor, told her he would take them and sell them to some king on the next voyage he should make. And so it happened that after a time he embarked and went on, reaching a certain country, he went to the palace to offer 6 lustrous strands of pearls for sale to the king. A servant appeared and offered to take them and show them to his majesty, but the sailor refused. He said, "No, I must present them myself to the king in order to settle about the price." Well, he entered the king's apartment, and his majesty found the pearls to be very precious and very rare, and he paid a large sum of money for the pearls. The young man told his majesty everything when the king asked him how he had discovered such rich, lustrous pearls. The young man told him about his mother, that when she was dying, she gave his sister a scarf and a comb, and that every time she combed herself or used the scarf, many large pearls and a number of seed pearls fell from her head. And the king said that he must bring his sister and present her to him together with the scarf and the comb, and that if what he said was true, he would marry her. However, if it was all false, the young man would die. Well, the young sailor returned home happy and delighted and gave his sister an account of what had occurred. Well, she was very pleased at the result of this interview and resolved to take the scarf and the comb with her and accompany her brother to the said country to marry the king. Before her departure, she informed a neighbor of hers that she was going to be queen. The neighbor asked her to do her a good turn, seeing that she was now going to be so rich and so noble. Would she please allow herself and her daughter to go with her company? Well, the day arrived for the departure, and they all embarked, the maiden, her brother, the neighbor, and the neighbor's daughter. And when they were sailing far at sea, the neighbor gave the maiden a drink of poison. As the maiden became very ill, the brother was anxious for her safety. Every day he came to inquire, how was she getting on? And one day the neighbor gave her such a quantity of poison that the maiden remained like one dead. Heartbroken, believing that she had died, and the brother took her body and with much grief gave her to the sea, as was the custom. After that, he began to lament, saying that he was very wretched and unfortunate now, as his sister had been the center of his only hope for advancing in life. Well, the wily neighbor, hearing this, advised him to pass off her own daughter as his sister to the king and take her to the palace to present her. The brother replied that the difficulty did not consist of that, but that he feared that the scarf and the comb would not act with her as with his sister. So they tested the girl, but no pearls, nothing else ever fell when she made use of them. The neighbor, when she said that it was not to be expected they would work here, that the moment they were in the presence of the king, the scarf and the comb would work then, no doubt the miracle would happen. So they reached the said land, and all three directed their steps to the palace. The young sailor presented his neighbor's daughter, the scarf and the comb, to the king, saying she was his sister. The king ordered her at once to use the scarf, but nothing fell. She combed herself with the comb, but instead of lustrous pearls, her hair fell from her head. The king, being very angry, said to the sailor, "You have deceived me, and now you must go to prison, and afterwards you shall be put to death." At the same moment, a servant who had gone to the beach with his net to catch fish for his majesty's service, on reaching the sea, saw a large whale which had been thrown onto the beach and was dead. But inside the fish, he saw something moving and heard a voice that said, "Let me out! Let me out of here!" Well, the servant fetched a knife and very carefully cut the skin of the whale, and then he saw the head of the maiden. He continued to slice open the fish, greatly astonished at what he saw, and at last he extricated alive the maiden from the belly of the great fish. He took her with him, but told her she must, for the present, remain shut up in a room of the palace and let no one know that she was there. The maiden told him her story and all that happened to her during the voyage, and how she had been in the depth of the sea and the whale had saved her. The servant, on his part, related to her what her neighbor had been doing at the palace, presenting her daughter under false colors to the king, and all that followed. Sadly, he informed her that her brother was on her account imprisoned and sentenced to die. On reaching the palace, the maiden was locked up in an apartment. She looked out of her window every day toward the prison door where her brother was detained. And on one occasion, as she did so, she saw the little white dog belonging to herself and her brother that he had taken with him on their voyages. And calling out to her pet, she spoke, "Cylindra, tell me how my brother is today." The little dog replied, "He is daily expecting to be sent to execution, and today is the first day the town crier publishes it." The next day, the maiden again looked out the window and again asked her little dog, "Cylindra, tell me how my brother is today." And the little dog replied, "Today the crier publishes the sentence of death for the second time." But the servant who had delivered the maiden, on hearing this, went up to the king and revealed the whole plot against the maiden. The king, on hearing it, said, "If what you say is true, call me tomorrow when the maiden speaks to the dog, for I wish to listen to what it says." Next day, at the right time, the king stood close to the window of his chamber to observe and listen to the maiden, and he heard her say, "Cylindra, how is my brother today?" And the little dog replied, "Today, the execution is published for the last time." When the king heard this, he ordered that the brother and sister should be brought before him into his presence. And on seeing the maiden, he told her to wipe her face with the scarf And instantly that she did so, showers of seed pearls began to fall from her head. He ordered her to comb herself with the wonderful comb, and immediately large bunches and rare pearls fell in profusion of the same class as the one in the bunches. The king then commanded the wily neighbor and the daughter to be put to death, and he married the maiden. She made a collar of pearls for her beloved little dog, Cylindra, and the brother had the great honor to be brother-in-law to the king and brother to the queen, after all. And this is the maiden from whose head pearls fell on combing herself, a Portuguese folk tale first published in the mid-1800s.
Thank you, Adrian. That was such a delightful story, and I love the talking dog.
I want one of those.
Yes, we could all use a talking dog. Thank you so much. Now, our next storyteller is coming all the way from Los Angeles, from the Story Masters, and his name is Peter Severian. I have been trying to practice this, so Peter, you have to correct me. Peter grew up with 9 siblings during and after World War II in rural Netherlands, where he roamed in the local forest every chance he got. His parents would tell stories every night, and his grandmother would do so during the weekend. He loved hearing his mother read from Maya the Bee, which was printed in Gothic script German and which she effortlessly translated and read on the spot in fluent Dutch. That seems to have set the stage for Peter's storytelling. Peter is also a consulting arborist and a landscape architect. He gives speeches about environmental subjects and global warming. Can't wait to hear his fantasy tale today. And here we go, Peter.
Thank you. In 1910, Elzéar Bouffier was a mid-50-ish French farmer. He lived in the lowlands of the Provence, that region in southeastern France where the Alps mountains descend into the foothills. In short order, Elzéar had lost his adult son and his wife, and now, apart from his dog, he had no one else in the world. He had no family left. He was a man of little education, but a keen observer. And when he looked at the desolate foothills, it was his distinct impression that the land was dying for lack of trees. As a matter of fact, he was right, because the Romans had already colonized that area, but they had overgrazed it with goats and sheep, and eventually abused the land so that it blew away in the wind and under the rain, and there wasn't much left besides some occasional white oak trees and some remnants of streams here and there. Elzéar did not really feel tied to his farm, and he was strong enough in his mid-50s, and so he thought, what can I do? He made a promise, and he said, "Dear Lord, if you grant me another 30 years, I will create a magnificent forest where now there is just desolate lands." He sold his farm, bought some remains of a home and a small flock of sheep, and moved in. He meticulously restored the farm and gathered acorns whenever he was there. And so he made it his habit that every night he would have dinner, and then he would count out 100 plump, perfect acorns. In the morning, he would leave with his dog, a walking stick thick as his thumb, made of iron and a yard and a half long, and his drinking gourd, and then he would set off for the nearby hillsides. And if he found a spot where there was some grass and some shrubbery that the sheep could graze on, he would leave his dog in charge, and he would charge up the hill and down the hill. And every once in a while, he would punch his walking stick in the ground, make a hole, drop in an acorn, and fill it back with soil. And thus he would spend all day long, spreading those trees far enough apart. He figured that if he planted 100 trees, 100 acorns a year or a day, roughly 34,000 acorns a year, that would amount to 100,000 acorns a year. And of those, perhaps 20,000 would sprout, and another 50% would die due to rodents and vagaries of nature, but that would still leave 10,000 trees where there had been none before. And it was his conviction that this region needed hundreds of thousands of trees in order to get revived. And so he planted, day in, day out, year in, year out. And World War I came and went. But Elzéar was so far away from civilization, and he worked so far under the radar that nobody really noticed him. And then, very slowly, changes would take place, almost imperceptible first. There were those little trees, and they grew only a foot a year, but they did. They added moisture to the air. And eventually, streams that had been dry since Roman times now started flowing again, and frogs and fish appeared. Weeds and flowers, grasses, willows, rushes moved in. The region started taking on a different look. And at the end of World War II, that forest now towered above the occasional visitor. And when those visitors asked him if he knew who owned the land, Elzéar said he didn't. And he didn't really care because he wasn't planting for people. He had a pact with the Lord. Word reached the government in Paris that miraculously a small forest had appeared in the Provence. So they sent out a commission to investigate. The commission never even found Elzéar. So they wrote a report that their conclusions, that they weren't really having any solid conclusions. A forestry commission was more successful. And they met Elzéar. They interviewed him. And smartly enough, they came to the conclusion that the best thing they could do was nothing at all, for him to keep on going and to prohibit any charcoal burning in the area. And that's what they did. By now, Elzéar had added beech trees and birch trees to his repertoire. And since he was walking a couple of hours a day to his new planting area, because by now the forest was extending miles in either direction, he built himself a new home at the place where he was planting. And slowly word reached the surrounding area that here was this place in the Provence where there were beautiful forests and the air was clean and clear and the land was inexpensive, and altogether some 10,000 people moved in. Elzéar kept on planting through World War I first and then World War II. And it wasn't until he was in his 90s that finally he had to go to the rest home in a nearby village. And that's where he died in his 90s. He had single-handedly planted hundreds of thousands of trees because that was his vision. This story was written by Jean Giono in 1954. And he wanted to create an unforgettable character. But most of all, he wanted to inspire his fellow people and the people who came after him to take good care of the planet by planting trees, by rehabilitating areas, and by changing the face of the earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was a beautiful, inspiring story, and I hope we can all learn from that and do our little part to restore the beauty and glory of nature. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's go on to our next storyteller. Her name is Ramya Srinidhi, and she comes from India, all the way from Bangalore. And she has a master's degree in psychology. She is a passionate storyteller, educator, and performing artist. Along with oral storytelling, she is also a practitioner of Kamishibai, the old Japanese way of storytelling with those picture boards. I don't know how many of you have seen that. And I've noticed that she even does her own beautiful artwork to enhance that experience. She is the founder of the Indian Kamishibai Association, and she believes that we are all made up of stories and stories choose their teller. As a young girl, the story of Cinderella was her favorite because there was magic in that story. And most of all, she really wanted glass slippers just like Cinderella. Now on to Ramya. Ramya, where are you?
Thank you so much, Rupa. I'm right here.
We don't see you, Ramya. We don't see you.
Can you spot me?
Yeah, I spotlit you. You have to turn your
the one
camera.
with the star I'm waving? Oh my God.
You have to turn your camera on, I think. It's
One second.
yeah.
She has two boxes. One of them
Am I
was,
visible now?
No, you're not. And yeah, the one that's you're talking from, it's a blank screen.
Am I visible now?
Nope, nope.
you were a minute ago.
Yeah. Oh dear. This is, do you want to work on it and then come back?
Is this better? Can you see me now?
No, we just your black screen. Okay, you want to work on this
Nobody
while...
can see me, is it?
Yeah, nobody can. We can just hear you. And we want to see you. So maybe let's give you some time to
Oh,
fix
God.
this while we go. Let's go to our final storyteller. Not final, we have two more. So let's go to the next storyteller, David, and give you some time to come back. Okay?
Okay,
Okay, I'm going to do that and give a little intro about David. Oh, you're back. Okay, do you want to tell now?
I'm back.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Is that fine now?
Good.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Technical glitches. We have all learned to live with it now. Thank you so much, Rupa, and thank you, Peter, for the wonderful story. So the story I have for you this evening, and of course, morning for me, is from the Brothers Grimm collection, the lesser-known story. It's called The 12 Windows. Of course, I have adapted it to my performative style of storytelling. So here it goes. Tararam, 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 pam, pam, tararam, 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 pam, pam. Tararam, 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 pam, pam. Welcome all of you, young and old, for a performance you have never beheld. Some of the acts may seem a little bold, but trust me, they're worth their weight in gold. Hello, everyone. Come on for this performance. Look, watch my monkey walk the tightrope. Watch him climb this little pole. Psst, there comes the princess. She's coming right here. As soon as she reaches, you quickly go and hide behind her neck, just under her braid. There, welcome for this great performance. And soon there she leaves. That's the end of the performance for you. Thank you so much for joining. Well, there goes the princess. Let me tell you the story of this beautiful princess who just walked out after watching an amazing performance. There once lived a princess who high up in her castle, there was a tower room with 12 windows. The windows faced in all directions, and through that, she would inspect her entire kingdom. When she looked out of the first window, her vision was more keen than any human being. Second, even better. Third, more distinctly. By the time she reached the 12th window, she could see everything that was high up in the sky, beneath the earth, just about everything. There was nothing that could be kept a secret from her. The princess proclaimed that if there was any man who could hide from her, he would be her husband. However, if he failed and she discovered him, his head would be cut off and stuck to a post. Well, 97 posts with the head of 97 men who had tried their luck was hanging in front of the castle as I begin the story. One day, 3 brothers came to this princess. They wanted to try their luck in finding the princess. As they entered, the 3 brothers wanted to try their luck. The first one, of course, thought that he could hide under the earth. He dug up a huge pit he got right into, covered himself with dirt and sat there. The princess went to her tower, not the first, but in the second window, she could distinctly see him. He was pulled out, his head cut off, and he was on the 98th post. The second brother thought he could walk as far as he could. He climbed the tallest mountain, went into the darkest of the cave, covered with a huge boulder, and he sat there. The princess went to her tower, not the first, second, third, But on the fourth window, she could spot him. He was brought out, his head cut off, and he was on the 98th post, 99th post. Well, the third brother, the youngest of the three, was charming. He was very handsome. He went up to the princess and he requested her. He asked her if he could get 3 chances. If he was spotted in the first 2, of course. Well, since he asked the princess very politely, and I told you he was very charming, she agreed to give him 3 chances. Well, the young man came back and he sat down to meditate, to think of a place where he could hide. Growling sounds started to come. Well, that was his stomach. He was very hungry. So he took his bow and arrow and set out to the forest to find something to eat. As he was meandering through the woods, he saw a raven flying high up. He picked his bow and arrow, about to shoot, and the raven cried out, "Stop! Stop, don't shoot. I could be of help to you." He lowered his bow, the raven flew away. He continued to walk. He reached a pond. There he saw a huge fish which had come up to get some air. He was about to shoot the fish and the fish called out, "Stop, don't shoot. I could be of help to you." He lowered his bow. The fish swooped into the middle of the lake. He continued to walk there in the forest, deep in the forest. Ow! He heard a fox in great pain. He went up to the fox. "Please remove the thorn from my leg. I'm in great pain," called out the fox. He removed the painful thorn and the fox was fine. He said, "Thank you, and I will remember your help." And quickly he jumped and flipped and disappeared into the woods. Probably that day the young man just slept, eating some fruits and berries. Well, the next day he was supposed to hide. He walked into the forest, not knowing what to do, where to hide. There he spotted the raven again. He said, "I have helped you. I have let you live once. Now you tell me where you can hide me so that I will not be spotted by the princess." The raven circled, thought for a while, swooped down, picked up the young man, and she took her to the nest. She broke open an egg. She put him inside and covered it up, and she sat on the egg. Well, the princess went to her tower. First, second, third, fourth. From the 5th window, she could see this young man sitting in the nest. He was brought out, the egg open, and there the young man jumped out. "You still have 2 chances," she said. He then walked up to the pond. There he looked, he called for the fish and he said, "I have saved your life. Now you give me an idea. Where can I hide so that the princess won't spot me?" he said. The fish came up, swirled once, and swoop, she swallowed the young man, took him into the bottom of the lake, hid behind the biggest rock, and now he was sitting inside the stomach of this huge fish. The princess went up to her tower room, looked out of the windows, the 5th, the 7th. She was impressed. But alas, on the 8th window, she could see him distinctly inside the fish's stomach. She sent her men who brought the fish out, cut it open, and the young man jumped out. Well, he walked straight into the dense woods. He called out for the fox, and there, the fox appeared. "Look, you're the clever one. You have to help me. I have helped you once. Now, where can I hide so that the princess cannot see me?" he said. The fox thought for a while, and soon he jumped and flipped in mid-air, and he landed as the animal trainer. He had the special skill to do that. And soon he asked the young man to flip and jump. And the young man landed as a small, tiny flea. The fox called his monkey, and all of them put up a big act and went into the town. They set up a huge circus camp under the palace. Tararam, 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 bum, bum. They made a lot of noise. They called everyone. The monkey started playing his act, and the princess came down to watch this. He asked the flea to go and hide behind, under her neck, inside her braid. And the flea, the young man who was the flea, did exactly as told. The act was over and the princess went back. Now it was time for her to find this young man, and it was her last chance. She opened the first. She was impressed. She was curious. She was to open each window. She was not able to find the young man anywhere. And there she was sure on the 12th window. When she opened the 12th window, she was not able to spot him anywhere. She was excited. She was thrilled. She ran down into her castle and she called out and she said, "He has done it. He has done it. He has hid himself from me." And soon the flea came out of her braid, flipped in midair and landed on the floor as a young man. She was thrilled and excited, and the two of them married and lived happily ever after. However, the access to the tower window with 12 windows, tower room with 12 windows was. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramya. That was very expressive and beautiful. We lost you every now and then, but it added to the mystery and your voice carried your story. So thank you. And now we shall go on to our next storyteller. Give me a moment. Our next storyteller is David Smith, who comes to us from San Diego. And he is an author, a podcaster, a multilingual translator, and a home brewer who splits his time between Mexico City and San Diego. He has published a variety of books, short stories, and articles in both English and Spanish, including 3 Nights in the Clown Motel, a book of non-fiction horror, as well as the series Gone Viral, Urban Legends of the COVID-19 Pandemic. He is the co-host of the podcast, To Russia with Love. He speaks 12 languages and has been to 33 countries. And his favorite fairy tale is any tale that depicts the fae folk in the old traditions. Not as sparkly winged creatures with wands, but as elemental nature spirits, mysterious, mystical, and sometimes malicious. Well, I wonder what he has in store for us today. I can't wait to hear David.
Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we dare not go a-hunting for fear of little men. Wee folk, good folk, trooping all together, green jacket, red cap, and the white owl's feather. Now, nowadays, most people who live in cities, when they think of fairies, they have a very specific image in their minds. When they think of fairies, they imagine these little creatures with wings and they sparkle and they have fairy dust coming off of them. They have a little wand. Sometimes they look a lot like Marilyn Monroe if you saw the old Peter Pan cartoon. But that's not what the original fairies were. And people who live in the countryside, in the forests, in the jungles, in el campo, in la sierra, these people remember the old ways. They remember the tales of the Fey folk, and they know that fairies are not these pretty, benevolent things at all. They're very ambiguous. Sometimes they do help people, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can even be malicious in how they treat people. And that's exactly what this young boy Pepe learned in a small town, the small town of Santa Lucia in the Costa Chica region of the state of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. This young boy Pepe, he was one of the few children in this town who had not been baptized. Now, this story was told to me by Mama Lola. She was from that town. This is not a story I found in a book or that I heard on a recording. Mama Lola told me, and she was Pepe's contemporary. She told me that Pepe, his parents, for whatever reason, they hadn't baptized him. Everyone else knew that that put him at risk from those elemental nature spirits. Now, in some parts of Mexico, they're known as duendes. In the Yucatan Peninsula, they call them aluches. But here in the jungles and forests in the Costa Chica region of Oaxaca, they're called los chaneques. Chaneques, they look like small people, but they're not quite people. There's something else. And you know they're coming close when you hear their cry, because they don't speak the human language that people do. They speak some other language that humans can't even really reproduce. But when you hear their cry, it sounds something like it echoes off in the dells and the groves and the valleys and hills. And it sounds like Squaliu, squaliu, squaliua. And you'll hear another cry coming from the opposite mountain range. Squaliu, squaliu, squaliua. Then you know that the chaneques are nearby, and parents who are conscientious, they bring their kids inside, they shut the doors. Sometimes they get their rosaries out. But Pepe, he was kind of a rebellious kid. He would just go and play and wander the forest by himself, and he's kind of a naughty kid, kind of travieso. He would pick on the other kids in the village, and nobody really liked him. He usually played by himself. Pepe, he was just sort of left to his own. So one cloudy day, Pepe, he was off playing down by the river. Everyone else knows the chaneques, they love bodies of water, rivers and lakes. But Pepe, he didn't care. He wasn't afraid of the chaneques. He wasn't afraid of anything. So he went down by the river, and he was down there just playing, skipping rocks across the water. And he heard that sound, squaliu, squaliu, squaliua. Nobody had warned him what that meant. So he just kind of looked up, and then he heard it again coming closer, coming down the canyon. Squaliu, squaliu, squaliua. And then he heard them calling to him, and it sounded like they were calling to him in human language now. He could understand them. Ven, Pepe. Ven a jugar con nosotros. Ven a jugar con nosotros. Come play with us, Pepe. Come play with us. And he kind of looked, who is this? That doesn't sound like anybody I know. And he looked, and then he saw those little figures, little tiny humanoid figures coming down from the rocks and down from the trees. They looked like people, but only about that tall, tiny little people with strange, sort of ugly faces, but they seemed friendly enough. They were asking him to come play with them, so he kind of walked over. Ven a jugar con nosotros, Pepe. Come play with us. So he walked up closer, and he kind of looked at them. And he bent down. He'd never seen anything that looked like that. And when he got close enough, the chaneques, they grabbed him by the arms and the legs, and they lifted him up. They're incredibly strong. They lifted him up on their shoulders, and all of them, there were dozens of them swarming around from all sides, and they picked him up, and they carried him off into the mountains, into the forests. Well, his parents waited for him. He didn't come back, and all night long, he didn't come back. Well, the next day, they asked everyone. Nobody had seen Pepe. So they went to the wise old curandera, the healer woman of the village, and they asked her, and she used the herbs and used the incantations she knew, and finally she could see through the ether, and she could see what had happened. She told them, se lo llevaron los chaneques. the Chaneques took him. They took him up into the mountains, up to their cave, way up in the mountains. Well, Pepe's parents, they were devastated. How would they get him back? They waited for him to come back days and days, weeks passed, and no word, no sign of Pepe. So finally, Pepe's father, he got together with all of the men in the village, and they all came together and they made a plan to go rescue Pepe from the Chaneques cave. So they talked to the curandera, and she told them she was able to divine more or less where that cave was in the mountains. She told them how to get there. And so at dusk, all these men set out. They had torches, and they carried their machetes and their torches, and they walked down the trails further and further into the mountains and into the canyons and valleys, following the directions that the curandera had given them, till finally they came to this sheer cliff going straight up into the sky, into the dark, cloudy sky, storms brewing in the sky. They could hear the thunder rolling, and they're all holding their torches, looking up, trying to see what is at the top of that cliff. And they looked, and right at the very top, with the last light of dusk, they could see him. It was Pepe. It was Pepe. It was that little boy, and he's standing at the edge of the cliff with his arms just straight out, stretched out, like he's tied with ropes, but they don't see any ropes. There's no trees or anything. But some unseen force is holding Pepe's arms out like a magnet. And he couldn't bring his arms down. They called out to him, "Ya, Pepe, bájate." And he just looked at them. They could see his fear on his face, but he couldn't move. He couldn't come down. And then they saw them. They saw the Chaneques crawling all over the rocks, these hideous little creatures crawling all over Pepe, crawling up on his shoulders, these creatures, and they could hear the squalio, squalio, almost mocking them, mocking the humans for trying to get back there, one of their own. And those Chaneques, they're just crawling all over the place. And so the men, they got brushed together and they set a fire. And the Chaneques just sort of looked down and smiled with those long, sharp white teeth. They weren't afraid of the fire. But then Pepe's father, he brought copal, that sacred ancient copal incense, that incense that was holy to all the ancestors long before the Spanish ever came here. And they put that holy copal incense on the fire. And when that holy smoke started to rise up to the top of that cliff where Pepe was, they could hear shrieks, squeals, screams like a wounded animal. And those Chaneques, they started to scatter. They all went scattering every which way, and eventually it was just Pepe standing up, and he was able to bring his arms back down again. Well, the men, they got some rope, and they climbed up that rock, and they got Pepe. They brought him back down, and seemed like he had been eating. He seemed like he didn't seem sick, but then they spoke to him, and he didn't speak back in any human language. He spoke back in this strange chattering sound. It was the language of the Chaneques. He'd forgotten how to speak like the humans from the village. He could only speak like the Chaneques. They brought him back home, and days and weeks passed, and Pepe, he wouldn't speak to people. He wouldn't understand people. He spoke this Chaneque language back to them. His parents were starting to think that they lost him for good. They thought his soul, his essence, it would never really come back because he'd been taken by the others, by the Chaneques. But then one day his mother was making the tortillas, cooking them up on the comal over the fire. And she asked Pepe, she just asked him if he was hungry. And he looked with this look of recognition. Sí tengo hambre. Yeah, I'm hungry. He'd come back. He was taken by the others, taken by the Chaneques up to their cave, but they managed to bring him back again. And they learned that when the whole village does come together and fights for one of their own, they're able to bring someone back from the brink of annihilation, even if they're taken by the spirits of the forest and the mountains, those creatures that are sometimes good, sometimes bad, those creatures that we really don't understand. And it's best just to give them a wide berth. Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we dare not go a-hunting for fear of little men. The Chaneques.
Thank you, David. That was fascinating. And I love the happy ending and the power of the mother's tortillas, which brought him back. Nothing like that, right? So now let's go on to our final storyteller, none other than Ed Lewis, who is, of course, as you all know, a board member of SAC and who has been organizing these genre storytellings for the last 2 years. And Ed is a storytelling groupie, self-confessed, who attends many storytelling events throughout the year. He is a retired teacher of young children and a professor, loves telling stories to children throughout the world as Eddie Spaghetti. He has taught storytelling classes and performed for adults, sharing personal stories and tall tales since 1994. His favorite fairy tale is Hansel and Gretel. He says he can relate to the issue of abandonment since he was adopted, and he can also appreciate how children overcame their obstacles. Power to you, Ed, and please take the stage.
Okay, thank you. So I was inspired to develop this story by listening to a master storyteller named Stephen Hobbs from Cornwall, England. And that's been the great thing about Zoom, is that we're able to connect and tell stories and listen to stories from people all over the world. Well, you may have heard of the Bridge to Nowhere from Ketchum, Alaska, from Ketchikan, Alaska, to the island of Gravina. It only has 50 people. It was made famous by Senator Ted Stevens in the early 2000s when he was developing this bridge to nowhere. He was supported by Sarah Palin at that time, who was running for a position as president. Now, that was touted as pork barrel spending. And it was the kind of the start of putting a hold on some of this pork barrel spending. And in 2006, the whole project was defunded. But I'm going to take you back in this story to pre-fame Gravina Island in 1919. And that was the year my mother was born on that island. It only had 100 people, and they all fished the rich seas for salmon. Now, she had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and the oldest brother and the youngest brother were born in Denmark. They fled a famine in that early 1900s, and they left Denmark, and they tried to get into the United States, but it was closed to those immigrants. So they made their way across Canada and eventually got into Alaska, where my grandfather built boats and settled on the islands. Now, everyone on that island knew each other, and most evenings they were swapping stories on the island in front of a fireplace. And that's where my mother learned to love stories. And one of her favorite stories is a story that she passed down to me and that I am going to share with you in my own way. Deep in the woods on Gravina Island, there were 3 bears that lived in this lavish castle. Their gourmet chef had just prepared their favorite breakfast, organic kale porridge. Now, Papa Bear took a bite of his organic kale porridge and he spit it on the ground. and screamed that it was too hot. Yes, you know that part. It was definitely too hot. Well, Mama Bear took a bite of her organic kale porridge and moaned that it felt like the glacier ice that she used in her pina coladas every night, because it was definitely too cold. What was it? It was too cold. Now, Baby Bear took a tentative bite of his porridge, and it was delicious. He scarfed that down in 3 bites because it was just right. Well, before long, they had left the castle to go on their normal stroll. And of course, they fired their gourmet chef, and they were going out to their happy place where they could meditate and get peaceful feelings again after such a trying morning. But Mama Bear looked at Papa Bear and said, I don't think it's safe for us to go. I mean, did you see the news last night? Lox Goldie has escaped from prison, and she was known as a thief. It won't be safe. Papa Bear went, of course it's safe. I have reinforced the door with 3 huge deadbolts. Nobody can get in there. And so they continued their way out to try to find some more peace in their life. Well, Lox Goldie had been sitting in their golden chariot, and she had heard everything that went on. She walked over to the door, and with one karate kick, smashed open the door off its hinges. And being a vegetarian, she smelled that organic kale porridge. And she went into the house, and she tried the Papa Bear's porridge, but of course, you all know that it was too hot. Yes, right, it was too hot. Well, she tried Mama Bear's organic kale porridge, and of course, it was too cold. Now, she was kind of a clever person, and she took Papa Bear's and Mama Bear's porridge and mixed it together. And it was just right. That's right, it was just right. So she ate all of that in one gulp through her delicate mouth. Now, then she went about thieving, which is what she did. She loaded the dishwasher, the furniture, all the kale, the bowls, the silverware, the oats into her stolen U-Haul truck. And then she was kind of tired. You know, she had been through the forest escaping from that maximum security prison the previous night. And so she went upstairs and she saw the Baby Bear's bed, and we all know that that bed was just right. What was it? It was just right. Well, about that time, the 3 bears had come back and they were in a peaceful state. They had done yoga, they had done meditation, and they saw the door, and they crept up to that door, and they knew that Goldilocks was in there because they heard her snoring louder and louder. Well, they knew exactly what they needed to do. They got in that golden chariot and they took off. And they started a new career in Northern California as organic kale farmers. Now, Goldilocks built up quite a reputation, even for many years. He was always one step ahead of the law. Now, if any of you have a castle, beware. And if one thing that you know about this story, the true story of the 3 bears and Lox Goldie, I want you to share it with anyone that you can. And if you do share it, just remember to send your royalty check to Ed Lewis at 2021 Castle Avenue, Ravenna Island. Thank you, and I'll expect those royalty checks soon.
Thank you, Ed. That was a delightful twist to an old favorite. And you got me really hungry for kale porridge now. Have you tried making that?
I will have to try that soon.
Okay, now we have come to the end of our wonderful assortment of lovely stories tonight. And I would like to request all the storytellers to show themselves on camera, and also the audience. If you'd like to ask them any questions or share any feedback, please do so in chat, or just tell everyone what you enjoyed. And we have a couple minutes, so let's all share the love here.
And if any of you have other events that you'd like to tell us about, please do that.
Yes.
And I'd like to welcome Lillian Bladeen, an old high school friend that I just reconnected with a couple weeks ago in Salem, Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Ed.
Hey,
Or as you were known to me as Eddie Lewis.
Eddie Lewis.
Eddie Lewis, yes. Thank you. That was just wonderful. I mean, you know, my bedtime's 8 o'clock and I'm still awake. So you guys did a really good job. Bravo.
All right.
Bravo.
Okay, I try to spotlight everyone, all the tellers today, so that yeah, you can share. So just unmute yourself and share whatever you like. And it was a fascinating evening, and I loved meeting, you know, the old storytellers as well as the new ones, and of course the kind audience.
Thank you, Rupa. Great job emceeing for us. Really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Excellent. It was excellent, as always. Thank you, Ed, and everybody who put it on, and the storytellers. Really good.
Yeah.
And
Thank
next,
you so much. Today my internet connection is totally giving me away. I just don't understand. Anyway, thank you so much. I enjoyed connecting all the way from India. Loved the stories, starting from Charles. Just loved such mesmerizing stories, and you know, the style that you say. Just loved it. So thank you so much, and thank you, Rupa.
And next month with the genre storytelling series, the third Wednesday of the month will be humorous stories. So we will have 7 storytellers from our different groups around California, and maybe a guest teller. So if you're interested in that, or anyone who's listening, let your Story Swap group know. And we do humorous stories, then we go to personal stories in August. September, we will go to folk tales. October, spooky, scary stories. November is dedicated to Telebration. And December are sacred stories, and tall tales, and myths, and legends, and stories of love, historical stories. So a good variety of different types of storytelling from all these great storytellers.
And we'd like to hear new voices, so do encourage your friends, your storyteller friends, to come and share their stories with us. And there is a lot of useful information in chat, so save the chat if you like.
You mentioned the Jenny Fund, Rupa, with our
we are going to also, we've been trying to take storytelling to underserved schools. Particularly in California, Title I schools, and in cases where children have never experienced the magic of storytelling. So where you come from, if you know of any schools that could, you know, make use of this offer, please reach out to me, and I'll be happy to, you know, organize some storytelling, either virtually or in person. We could start in the summer if there are summer programs, or in the fall. So we would love to extend this all over California. So please reach out to me if you have any leads, and or even if you like to coordinate this, we have, we encourage people to help us coordinate in your particular area. So anybody wants to say anything?
And so, Ramya, you're in India right now. You're connecting from India.
That's right. Yeah, I'm connecting
Wow, that's
From Bangalore, I think that's where she is.
that's
from
amazing.
India, yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's a wide-reaching group now.
The southern part of
And
Thank
Ram
you
is,
so much. I've been telling here in the past also. Thanks, Ed.
yeah, Ram is part of the Sacramento Storytellers Guild, where she's told quite a few stories, and Contra Costa Tail Spinners. So she's done quite a bit of storytelling throughout California from India.
And I think there's a
Yes.
reciprocal thing. There's a reciprocal thing going on. So if any of you want to tell on in festivals in India, you're most welcome, and you can get access through Ramya and other storytellers who come as our guests. So it's a
Yes,
fun.
Chennai Storytelling Festival. I think a lot of you do tell. I mean, Eric Miller is very well known in these circles, and every month he has an event on Mondays, and it starts in India in the evening. So it is more like in the morning for people on the west. So a lot of people, even Ed has told stories there. I think through Eric Miller's story event. So you're definitely welcome to come and tell. And so that's a beautiful platform.
Only thing, it's a
Rupa
bit
has also
early. Yeah,
been
it's
there,
early.
yes.
It's early morning for us. So if you're an early bird, it works out well because it'll be like 6 a.m. in the morning for us. But if you want more information, I'll be happy to connect you with Eric. And it's gone global now, right? We can all tell all over the world and meet people from all over. So yeah, anything else before I close the Zoom room? Yes, Charles?
I want to thank Ed for inviting me. It was quite delightful.
Yeah, and thanks for producing your blog. That's how I got to know you and find out about you through NSN.
Well, it just felt great to have a whole night of storytelling and listen to that variety. I enjoyed myself tremendously. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Adrian, you have something to say?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
No, but thank you. It's been great. I really do always enjoy being able to participate and explore different folk tales from around the world. So
That's great.
Where are you again, Adrian?
I'm in Southern California in Riverside.
Riverside, that's right. I knew
Yeah.
you were not that far from the San Diego folks. but
Right, right.
And Leanne, you want to say something?
Oh, sure. I put in a bunch of stuff in there in the chat. Although David and Marilyn McPhee, who's in the audience, and I will be telling live at a mead hall tomorrow night. So if anybody's in the San Diego area, come to Twisted Horn Mead and Cider. We'll get started around 6:30.
That's cool. I saw that. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. And David, you want to say something?
I was going to say something to Adrian. If you're interested in the local lore around Riverside and the Inland Empire, I just posted in the chat. It's a book that I came across a couple of years ago, Secret Inland Empire. It's got a lot of really cool lore and ghost stories and just strange spots in the Inland Empire. That's not very well known at all.
That's great. Was that the Amazon link you put in?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. No, that'd be great.
So San Diego, we've got some famous legends, the Whaley House and the Hotel del Coronado, but
Yeah.
the Inland Empire they've got its own really cool lore as well.
Oh yeah, I grew up in San Jose, not far from the Winchester Mystery House,
Oh, sure.
and that is a load of fun. So
Oh yeah.
A lot of
Great.
spooky stories there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank-
Okay. Yeah, again, it was lovely meeting you all, and thank you for coming, and hope to see you again next month. And till then, take care and keep telling your stories. Good
Bye.
night, good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
I-
Good night.